Good afternoon and welcome back to our final day of Real Estate Live UK's first week of events in 2021. The programme, brought to you by White Label and our partners, has had a fantastic week of promoting places and creating conversations across the property sector. And you can view more details about this week's events and watch back any you've missed on our website. I'll let you know about the final session that's coming up today too at the end of this session. Before we begin this panel discussion, to kickstart the audience engagement, we'll be asking a short poll asking what will be the most important trend for regeneration professionals in 2021. Quite a big question, and we'll be showing the results to this poll that we've been running in every session this week, probably early next week. A few options are now on your screen, so please take your time to read through those and submit your answers. And while you're doing that, I'm delighted to introduce our next panel, who will be discussing British independent businesses in 2021 and beyond in partnership with Aviva Investors and Barwell Business Park. We'd really like to maintain the audience interactivity levels during the discussion, so please do submit questions for the speakers throughout the session using the Q&A feature. And to moderate those questions and host this session, I'm now delighted to hand over to Claudette Forbes, who's a Director of CAF Consulting, who will be chairing this debate. Over to you, Claudette.
Thanks very much, Bonnie, and welcome to everyone to this session looking at where independent businesses will be in 2021 and beyond. I mean, this has surely been one of the most challenging operating environments for businesses for a long time, and that's probably an understatement. A number of issues that they're confronted with, not least the COVID pandemic. So I'm Claudette Forbes, and I'll be chairing this panel discussion. In turn, as I ask them to speak for a few minutes. Once they've done that, I'll ask for questions and contributions from the audience. So without further ado, let me start with our first speaker, Colin Lawrence Waterhouse, who's Asset Manager at Aviva Investors. Colin, do you want to give us your insights very briefly?
Thanks, Claudette. I think just to introduce myself, so as you said, I'm Colin Lawrence Waterhouse. I'm an asset manager for Aviva Investors. I'm responsible for all industrial assets that we hold within Southwest London, which includes probably the most prominent of which is Barwell Business Park over in Chessington. I think you probably hit the nail on the head when you said that it certainly has been a challenging 12 plus months for British businesses, not just having a global pandemic to deal with, but obviously the changing world post-Brexit as well, with the altered sort of import-export requirements that now imposes. I think generally from the businesses that we're engaging with, the one message which is certainly ringing out is that adapting is key, whether it's to the pandemic and the outcome of Brexit, to whatever might be coming down the road. I think, flexibility and adapting is important now, probably more important than it's ever really been. And that's not just in terms of the business itself, but also the staff, how they work and operate, the equipment they use and how that works, and more specifically, obviously from our side, the real estate side of the problem as well. How will the space flex as the business does? And I think it's been really, really interesting to see how occupiers have changed and adapted over that last 12-month period. So probably the one which has got the most airtime has been the e-commerce sector, obviously not being able to necessarily go out and buy goods in the more traditional retail environments. The e-commerce sector has absolutely flown. Internet sales, the percentage of total retail sales have gone from circa 19% in February of last year to over 36% in January of this year. So that really highlights just the strength of change in the market. And this has put a lot of added strain on the network that sits behind e-commerce, the logistics market. Distribution networks are having to expand rapidly, whether that's bigger national and regional distribution hubs, whether that's more local last mile logistics facilities. But it's not just the logistics sector that's had to flex. Other businesses have similarly had to adapt as well. And what we've seen certainly in our portfolio is several occupiers changed dramatically how they operate, or even the sectors that they operate in, to deal with the different environment they find themselves in. One Barwell business actually started producing defibrillators on site alongside a furniture refurbishment business. Another one has anticipated rapid growth in their movable wall products and is having to widen their business to adapt to that. Some companies have needed to reduce overheads, where others have needed to expand. Some occupiers have relocated, and we've even seen a lot of occupiers need additional sites. Take up of industrial property last year hit record levels, which, if you'd asked us what take up stats would look like at the beginning of 2020 for that year, none of us would ever have said it would be a record-breaking year. Why would we? But it absolutely was. And at Barwell, that was borne out by 8 new businesses joining the park, a personal record for the park over a circa 10-year period. Some of the newest occupiers that we have join us have actually come across from much more traditional office and in some cases retail properties as well, to take up industrial units. So that has been a slight change that we've noted. Others have found themselves relocating from poorer quality properties, wanting to be in premises where occupiers where their staff can feel more comfortable and almost more proud to work. There's also a business image perspective there as well, wanting to be in the right environment for their customers. I think the message is all businesses have been impacted very differently over the last 12 months. So there hasn't been a one size fits all response that we as a real estate provider can offer. What we have tried to do is enable our leases to think about almost to be as flexible as the buildings themselves need to be. Our quick lease system now enables occupiers to get into units and up and running far faster than they ever have before. In some cases in as little as a week. So that's a bit of a game changer from our perspective. Our new trade-up clauses that we're putting into our leases enable occupiers to expand without having to wait for a lease expiry or break option in order to do it. So I think generally our approach is working. I mean, occupiers on Barwell Business Park are moving into bigger properties. We're also seeing, as I said, that improvement in the transaction time. So, businesses can start operating as quickly as possible from new premises. I think those are probably the key points from me, Claudette.
Well, that's been an amazing array of things. Your core theme around flexibility. I mean, that's some very helpful insights for me. The stuff I didn't know or wasn't aware of was happening across businesses. So I'm going to move on to Andrew Goodacre, who is Chief Executive of the British Independent Retailers Association. Andrew, let's really looking forward to hearing your insights on the topic.
Yes, thank you very much. So British Independent Retailers, we are a national body. We've been existing now for about 120 years, and all we do is retail. It's all independent retail, mainly non-food. So we specialise in areas such as hardware, DIY, cookware, fashion is prominent in our membership. And we get a very wide insight into, geographically, we spread across the whole of the UK, and the different sectors and size of shop that we deal with. So we go from a small pet shop to an independent department store. 2020 has been, well, retail is always dynamic. Definitely interesting and dynamic. 2020 set the bar somewhat in that. And I think there's 2 massive changes in society that will impact going through to 2021. One, Colin's already referred to, the penetration of online sales. The figures Colin mentioned were for total retail. In the non-food market, the penetration's even higher. I think at some points last year, 50% of non-food items were bought online. And whilst when shops reopen, that figure tends to recede, it's unlikely to fall back to the 20% it was before. So there's been this acceleration in online purchasing. The second big change is where people work and where people live. And many of us are living or working where we live now by virtue of being enabled to work from home. And again, I don't see people returning 5 days a week to the office. And if people spend more time in their areas, exploring their areas. We've seen this increase in a greater propensity for local shopping, for using local stores. And we expect that to continue through to 2021 and beyond as well, because people are starting to appreciate what's on their doorstep and not necessarily travelling into the large city centres. That poses a problem for the large city centres, in fairness, which is where the large stores tend to dominate. And that's why you're seeing some of their problems come to the fore in terms of the liquidations or the loss of Debenhams or Arcadia and many more over the last 12 months. So retail continues to be very challenging, continues to be very difficult. The brilliant thing about independent retailers, and the thing I most admire about them, is their tenacity, their ability to reinvent themselves. So we've seen many people move online. We've seen many people move to services and ways of working that they hadn't considered, doing their own deliveries, click and collect, doing fashion shows through Facebook or Zoom, wine tasting virtually. Things that, using technology like this to engage, connect, and really make sure their customers don't forget about them, most importantly. And the more they do that, the better they will succeed. But then the ongoing question is, how much do I need my shop there for? And I think the shop still is very relevant. It's still very important to an independent business. But they need to create this omni-channel, and it's been talked about for a long time, but COVID-19 has really brought it into sharp focus, and you need an online presence now to maximise what you do in your shop business. The use of the shop may well change over time. It may well be that people use their shop for different reasons, maybe more so on the click and collect, as people make the choice online and then come in for the fulfilment. And that could well be a feature going forward, almost like the Argos style offering. I think in terms of fashion, when I think about fashion, at the moment, we've got lots of people using their homes as changing rooms because they can't go into stores to try things on. That causes problems for deliveries and returns. I could well imagine some of the empty space that's been created being turned into people creating events out of people trying clothes on with friends over a certain time, like people do for weddings, but take it down to mainstream fashion and allow people to create in a good environment, relaxed environment where people can have a drink and where there's a personal service element, order their clothes online, but actually try them on in the shop, buy extra in the shop and fulfill the order in the shop. And if you don't want it, leave it in the shop. And so there could well be differences in there, but I think we'll see creativity and determination from independents to continue to be part of their communities, and that's where they want to be. They're often at the heart of it anyway, and they'll continue to play that role.
That's a really fantastic and fascinating insight, and I think everyone recognises that independents have fared pretty well. I mean, it's still challenging for them, but you're right in terms of the creativity that's been driven out of the crisis and the way.
Yeah, I think I would hold back on saying fared pretty well. I mean, they've readjusted. They haven't transferred their shop business in totality online, so they're still missed out on what they might normally sell. And clothing, especially, I would say, is by far and away the worst hit sector, because with clothing you need events. You need reasons to buy new clothes. You need, and we're not buying suits, we're not buying work shirts, and we're not buying outfits for a day at the races, proms, weddings, whatever the case may be. So I think certain sectors within retail have been particularly hard hit and will need, therefore, more support in order to come back.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed for that, Andrew. I'm going to move across retail related to Kirsten Henley, who's Chief Executive of Kingston First. Kirsten, over to you.
Thank you, Claudette, and hi everybody. As Claudette says, I head up an organisation called Kingston First. We're the business improvement district for the town centre, Kingston upon Thames. We work with around about 750 businesses and organisations across sectors really in the town centre, including independent retail. So we've been at the coalface alongside our members, working through the past 12 months, and my gosh, what 12 months it's been. I just want to say a couple of things about what's happening in Kingston, and then perhaps also come on to some requests, if you like, from certainly what I'm hearing from independent businesses about what's absolutely essential for them succeed in the coming few months, and Andrew may indeed have some views on this as well, and be hearing them too. So I think Kingston is well placed to support the independence that we've got in our town centre through the recovery period from this pandemic. We are seeing that smaller market towns, or market towns in fact, are faring better in terms of footfall and patronage, and this local loyalty that very much seems to be a theme of what we're seeing in the town centre, because people are working from home and because people are using sustainable means and modes for accessing these places. And we certainly saw that in the 2 opportunities that the town did have to reopen in the summer and that short period at Christmas. Footfall was outperforming certainly Greater London and the UK national averages. Our year-end position in Kingston was we were 36% down in footfall compared to a Greater London average of 51% and the UK 45%. So trying to start to see that actually historic town centres like Kingston, with green spaces, a wonderful riverside location, we've been able to stay relevant to people, and we've been able to provide the amenities that people need for their day-to-day well-being, in terms of riverside walks and visits into the town centre, and for essential shopping. So I think there's something for town centres to think about in terms of how broad their offer is. What other assets have they got to encourage people to come in and experience beyond retail? And we're not resting on our laurels in Kingston on that. We know that we've got a wonderful visitor experience, but we are looking at ways to continue to improve our public spaces, to continue to improve the physical environment of Kingston, because that will attract people to come and have a good day out, a weekend away, or indeed just make sure that we retain that local loyalty that we've built up over the past year. The physical experience of town centres absolutely needs to be part of our recovery, because retailers cannot operate in an environment that people don't want to be in. So we really shouldn't underestimate that, and we might come onto it, but with the local authority, with Duncan and his team, we're looking at that acutely. I think the other thing to say is that businesses are still wanting to invest in places. We've seen a number of retailers and leisure and hospitality businesses set up in a pandemic when they haven't been able to open in Kingston town centre, which is extraordinary if you think about it. But these are national names through to independent stores and businesses, and they still see the importance and relevance of having a bricks and mortar presence in a town centre, and our vacancy rate is around about 11.5%, so just under the UK national average. So aside from the place discussion, what do independent businesses need, in particular what do independent retailers need in terms of support in the coming months and for the rest of the year? Absolutely, they need financial support. They don't just need a business rates holiday going into the coming year. We need a fundamental review of business rates, and I think that is the key to ensuring we've got sustainable town centres with a broad business mix in them. Furlough will still be required. We may see a slower return to our town centres. That may mean that businesses, retailers, leisure and hospitality business aren't operating at capacity. They may need to look at staffing patterns to support that, so an extension to furlough. And Colin touched on this, but the importance of landlords as well, being pragmatic, being flexible, taking a long-term view and working with their tenants is also critical to what retailers and independent businesses need over the coming months. A couple of other things from me. We need consumer confidence. We need to try and find ways to encourage people to feel confident and safe about returning to their high streets. And the final thing I'd say is that let's hope that when we're reopening this time, we're reopening for good, because there has been huge costs incurred by businesses, which independent retailers feel in particular about opening and closing and opening again. We all want to, and fingers crossed, we all want to go through a safe reopening that's appropriate and commensurate with what's happening with the vaccine and infection rates. But let's hope that when we reopen this time, we're reopening for good.
Thank you very, very much, Kirsten, talking about the importance of the town centre offer on top of retail, which I think has been a strategy for a long time. So it shows we're, going in the right direction on that. I'm now going to turn to Duncan Brown, who's Assistant Director of Regeneration at Kingston Council. Duncan, over to you for your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks for that, Claudia. And I think Kirsten alluded to sort of half of my job is working with Kirsten and her team and on regeneration and physical side and the place. And as she says, it's absolutely important that we now invest in place as part of our recovery strategy. My other half of my job is now the economic side and support skills and employment. And just really, I suppose, from a Kingston perspective, we are sort of the second smallest borough. The same challenges that every London borough and authority across the country is also experiencing around really rapid rates of high unemployment, particularly in our young people. So the council has taken quite a proactive role now in this area. We've set up a task force, an economic recovery task force that's met 4 times. We have 4 focused work streams on place and investment, which deals with small businesses particularly and supporting business, green recovery, digital and employment and skills, which is all about launching programs of support. So we think that is fundamentally all part of the jigsaw around supporting and promoting local businesses. We host 9,000 businesses in the borough, but 90% of them are micro businesses. So that's under 10 people. So it's a significant proportion of our working population works in small businesses. So the pandemic has really brought us together in a strategic partnership through the task force with the likes of Kirsten Kingston First, the Chamber of Commerce, Aviva. So a number of you in the room are part of that task force. It's a public private sector partnership where we're trying to pool our resources to address some of these challenges. I mean, just on business support, we've distributed over £40 million worth of government grant to our local businesses. And that's been really successful, we believe, and we've had genuine feedback from businesses saying you have saved us, even if it just involves paying the utility bills for an extra month or 2, it's kept them alive. So that we're not underestimating that as just a small proportion of help that the local authority can offer, but we are getting into places now which particularly Kingston traditionally was actually retracting from because there was no need for the local authority or the public sector to intervene and support in this way. So, Kingston was at full employment pre-pandemic, and businesses were broadly doing okay. But I think the changes that have come about are what panel members have mentioned about this behavioural change around working and living in your neighbourhood, where a sort of suburban borough like Kingston has really benefited from, and we're seeing that demand outstrip the supply of local office and workspaces. We are looking at that and looking to invest in that area now to enable that. So there's some benefits that have come of that, but certainly the 45,000 or so commuters that were going into London every day pre-pandemic is just not going to come back. So we will be hosting them in the borough, and they're a highly qualified population as well. You've got some of the highest qualified people in the country living in the borough and in the southwest region. So an enormous pool and asset that we should take advantage of working with our local businesses. So just going back to the task force, we've adopted a number of streams of work which focus on innovation, and with developing grant programs through government to really target and support local businesses to thrive, adapt. So I would say we are well placed. We're not complacent. We're working closely with our partners to sort of bring that forward over the coming months and launch those. And so we are growing our way out of this recession as well as obviously helping our current businesses survive and adapt.
Thank you very much, Duncan. So really pleasing to hear that there is a big partnership effort to try and help businesses come through this. crisis. So I'm going to move on to an actual business owner. And we've heard Colin talk about Barwell Business Park, and Lee Manning's business, he's Chief Executive of United Business Group, is actually an occupier of Barwell Business Park. And Lee, it would be great to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Claudette. Afternoon, everybody. So I'm the COO of United Business Group. We're an office technology services business that's been going for about 30 years. And I just wanted to talk to you about a bit of the work that we've been doing with our customers. So that's working with them on their technology and the response to how they've handled the pandemic. I mean, the main thing that people have decided to do is look at ways of communicating remotely, stuff like this through Zoom and Teams and other bits of software. That seems to be the main take up. Some people have stopped there and thought that's all we need to do. But a lot of people decided that they have to go further with things. So one of the big challenges that a number of our customers has faced has been collaborative working. So if you're outside of the office environment, how do you get project teams together? How do you make sure deadlines are still hit? So there's a number of different software platforms that we've helped implement with different customers, and the response has been really good. At first we had, I'm sure you had the same kind of things where people didn't want to put their webcams on. People were resistant to working collaboratively, in real time with other people. But actually, as we've gone through, it's become easier and easier to get people to adopt these strategies. And I'll be honest, these are conversations we've been having people in theory for years, but people have been resistant to change. They've always thought, that doesn't apply to my business. I couldn't possibly do that. That won't work here. And then you find that when somebody's forced into doing something, it's actually pretty easy and they've adopted it. And a lot of our customers now are really rethinking what is their business going to look like going forwards, especially from an office point of view. We've got some customers that are looking to downsize their office space by up to 80% and have people work from home either full-time or part-time come into the office. So I think that's quite an interesting point as to how that will change commercial property in the future. Okay, there's going to be maybe some vacancies, but then you're going to have some bigger companies that want to come down into the mid-market size. It's going to offer quite a few opportunities for all of us, really. And I think that technology is the thing that allows all of this to happen. A couple of other challenges that people have faced is trying to deal with decentralized systems and documentation. So whereas you might have, I don't know, an accounts payable team that would receive all the invoices in through the post, and then it gets split out between people, how are they changing their work processes to be able to deal with this? Some people might just set up a simple inbox for things, but other people need something a bit more complex. So it's quite interesting, some of the projects we've had to work on. And then the other main thing has been with customer engagement and sales. So a lot of people are used to doing things over the phone or email, but there are still some traditional businesses that require meetings and site visits and things like that. And how are they adopting? So one of the challenges has been getting people's CRM up to date. So in our business, we use Salesforce. It's really great. But some people have absolutely nothing. They have an Excel spreadsheet with their customers on, and that's it. So how can they change their processes to really engage with their customers? Marketing, we've seen a huge rise in social media marketing over the last year. You just have to look at the share prices of things like Facebook and so on. That's absolutely rocketed through that. But also that sales bit, how can you get your point across to people without necessarily seeing them face to face, shaking their hand, all those traditional methods of doing business? How can you do that in a more virtual world? So it's quite interesting to see the role that technology is playing in modern businesses that, as somebody alluded to earlier, have to adapt. If you stand still, you will just fail. So people are adapting, and that's really great to see. Just from our own point of view, our own business has been reasonably badly affected. We provide a lot of on-site technology services. We have customers telling us we can't come on site, but at the same time, we still need to resolve their issues for them. So we've been doing a lot of remote work for them. But Brexit's obviously been chucked in the middle of this as well. So that's given us an extra thing to think about. And from our own point of view at our place in Barwell, you know, we've had to increase our stock holding to compensate for potential supply chain issues. We've seen real major problems over the last year. I mean, we host more meetings now about supply chain than we do about anything else in our business. And that's been a big thing. So having our warehousing to be able to deal and cope with potential supply chain issues has been invaluable. But, you know, we're doing really well as a business now. We've adapted and we've made some changes ourselves, and hopefully you guys have implemented some of these changes in your business as well. But yeah, happy to take further questions if you want to discuss anything.
Thank you. I'm sure the audience will agree that you've all offered some really incredible insights into all of this. Lee, you kind of in your talk, you talked about the changing kind of nature of occupation on industrial parks. You talked about some businesses now downsizing as their staff. They're kind of happy for their staff to be working from home a lot. And I thought I'd just use that to open up to the rest of the panel to offer some further insights into that. So just looking at what businesses' requirements will be on industrial space. You know, Colin, you alluded to that in respect of Barwell. Others have commented. Colin, do you have something you'd like to kind of say to expand on Lee's point on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of probably going back to my earlier point, there isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. I think we're trying very hard at Barwell to get to a point where all of our buildings can be as absolutely flexible as they need to be. And we have to be aware that the way business operates, no two businesses operate in exactly the same way. With exactly the same internal layout or exactly the same equipment. So the buildings we provide have to be flexible enough to be able to absorb the fit out that any one occupier may need to do. So for example, Lee's building, I know it does have, but you know, needs elements of office fit out. That needs to be sort of demountable partitioning. That needs to be quick and easy to install. So from our perspective, part of our new lease approach is to actually allow that demountable partitioning to be an alteration that a tenant can just press on with as quickly as they need to, rather than something that requires a formal, lengthy landlord's consent. And I think it's that level of flexibility where an occupier can make non-structural changes that ultimately don't have a major impact on the building long term from our perspective, as quickly as they need to enable the building to better fit their business faster. I think it's just thinking a little bit differently about how space adapts for occupiers and how they can make it work for them at the end of the day.
Are there any other panel members who'd like to comment on this question? If not,
sorry, I'm just thinking about our own business, which is 40 odd employees, and all but 3 of them have been working from home for almost 12 months now. And I really just don't think they'll return to the office. So we used to have 3 office buildings. We've let out 2. We could operate from one of them ourselves, and even that's probably too big for us. So I agree with Lee's point about the downsizing that will occur. That has huge impact in city centres. It'll be interesting to see how city centres deal with that. The downside of remote working is, from my perspective, I worry about people being creative and having that spark you get from face to face. And it's really, no matter how good the technology is, I think it's really difficult to achieve it through a virtual process. But in general, I think the large city centres with less commuters, different usages, companies downsizing, I think there's a real challenge in the Birminghams where we are. London has its own problems anyway, and Manchester's, Leeds, etc. You know, I think those commercial centres will need some creative thinking about making the best use of their space and how to repurpose their space in that area.
I think if I can just jump in on that as well a little bit, Claudia. I think what we've certainly seen, I don't operate in the office sector, so I won't comment too much on that. But I think certainly from some of my colleagues that I've spoken to about how their occupiers are adapting to this. What they are seeing is perhaps not always necessarily a reduction in the amount of office space a company occupies, but certainly a repurposing of office layout, for example. So working very much on the principle that when teams are going to be in the office, and I think there's an acknowledgement it probably will be a bit less, chances are the purpose of those days, those meetings are going to be very different. It's going to be a very different reason for being in the office than perhaps it was before. I don't think it'll be so much going in, sitting at a desk, making phone calls, replying to emails. When you're in the office, it may very well be more collaboration sessions. So, thinking about how that perhaps looks in a real life office, that might mean sort of much larger tables, almost meeting room style, with better connectivity to a central display or something along those lines. So I think we'll need to, it's very difficult to second guess how businesses are going to operate because, as I said before, all businesses are different. But I think I agree in part with the previous comments. I think that there will be a change in the way space is used. But I don't think we can at the moment write off our office properties because I just think they'll evolve. I think this is just part of an evolution.
Thank you very much. Now, just had a question in from Hannah Wright, who basically is asking the similar questions the one I was just about to put to you all, and she asks, do you think that with the downsizing of larger offices, this also offers up opportunities for local towns to offer office space? And she suggests that the term hybrid seems to be used a lot at the moment. Who'd like to comment on that? Kirsten, you look like you want to.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. I think rather than using the phrase sort of office space, it's workspace that we might want to be thinking about. So how are people going to want to work, and how can we create the space that they want to work in for the reasons that we've talked about, whether it's in teams, whether it's in one-to-one meetings, whether it's just actually working on your own. Of course, pre-pandemic, you'd go into a coffee shop and you'd see half of it, 3/4 of it, full of either meetings or people sitting on computers working. So I absolutely think, that's the kind of workspace, isn't it? It's not an office, but it's workspace. And town centres are where coffee shops, eateries, where people want to be and where people want to part socialise, part work, part meet others. So I think, yes, absolutely, there's an opportunity around not thinking just about office space, but thinking about workspace. And then to Colin's point, what needs to be feeding into that workspace to make it really attractive and better than working from home? And I think that is all about the amenities around that particular building or location, and potentially building in leisure to a workspace environment. So having an in-house coffee shop or restaurant or whatever. So you're starting to see workspace with restaurants, with coffee facilities, with, meeting space. I think there is a lot of uncertainty about this, but my view would be, let's talk about workspace rather than office space.
Okay. If there aren't any other comments from the panel, I'll move on to another question from the audience. Perhaps one for you, Duncan. Someone has asked, what actions will Kingston Council take to ensure customer confidence within the area whilst outside, especially in small communal areas where social distancing is not always possible? We'll start off with you, Duncan, and maybe one.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think, well, first of all, I'd say I think we all have to play a part in this. And I think, yes, absolutely, the council has responsibilities in its regulatory functions, but also its responsibilities for place. And we have been working very closely with Kirsten's team around the first reopening of the town centre, done in a very safe fashion, so people felt comfortable in open spaces. And I think there was some really positive feedback around that. We put lots of signage up. Very clear branding. We had stations for hygiene, so people wash their hands. A lot of communications and comms around it. We've also been looking at closing streets to break out more space particularly for food and beverage operations, but just generally more space for people in the street. So clearing out some of the traffic. Well, I did see the comment in the box around how does that conflict with sort of the business requirements around servicing. And I suppose I would say to that is that we we bring business along all the way, and all our constituent businesses, and get their feedback around that. And there is flexibility there around how we sort of overcome that issue around, does servicing disrupt the pedestrianised environment or not? And we have time, we can arrange timings and parking bays move, and it just dealing with the environment in the flexible ways is key. There is another piece of work, and we are really focused on this at the moment, around social distancing and making the town centre safe. We've got about 20 live sensors at the moment, which are tracking anonymously, I might say, people's movement in the town centre, and there's a live daily picture around how people are moving through the town centre, and it comes up with, you know, maps and concentrations. So it means we can, in an agile way, respond to where there are pinch points, or we can put measures in place, working with businesses and the business improvement district to mitigate where there might be concentrations of activity. So there's some quite pioneering technological innovation in this space around how we do that. I mean, I suppose we just have to trust people are sensible as well, and the majority of the population is, and we don't want to be enforcement heavy. But I think, as I say, there is a lot of work going on in this area, particularly in I think Kingston Town Centre particularly benefits with its open spaces and the river, so that is possible, but there will be pinch points. But it's transforming the way we use the spaces, and I'll just go on Kirsten's point. I think by diversifying the town centre, we are seeing different behavioural patterns now being used at different times of day, and people are there for different reasons. And even when we're in full lockdown, and I suppose we still are, aren't we, in January, and the town centre was still being used. People just want to get out. They want to walk through it. They find it attractive, the environment. They want to be in the river. So they might be window shopping because everything's shut, but genuinely people just enjoy being there. So that's a real positive for Kingston. And yeah, just back to that point, we as a council are looking at all measures to ensure it's a safe environment to enjoy and work in. Kirsten, I don't know if you have something more.
I was just about to say the same. Kirsten.
I think you've summarised the position really well there, and I have to say I've not met a single business of any sector that isn't interested in working safely for its staff and operating in a safe way for its customers. It's absolutely top of the list of things to get right for businesses when they come to reopen, and they took it really, really seriously last year. They took it seriously again at Christmas, and they will be coming into this spring. I think our opportunity in Kingston is this time, as Duncan's described, how can we look at streets and spaces differently? And again, I'd come back to this point around, it's not just leisure and hospitality folks that want lovely, amazing, inviting spaces. We talk to dental practices, opticians, office workers. There is generally a consensus here that we do need to think more creatively about space, keeping accessibility, of course, top of our minds, but also encouraging people to use our town centres in a different way.
Thank you very much. Kind of stick on the theme of town centres, because there's a question from Shirley Leader, who asks, what is your view of pedestrianisation? Our town of Petersfield is thinking of stopping people from driving through the town, and the businesses are worried about a fall in footfall. Perhaps Kirsten, perhaps also Andrew.
Yeah, I know Shirley, in fairness, so good question, Shirley. Okay. I think I was going to respond to what Duncan and Kirsten have said, in that last time around, the local authorities, like businesses, were learning for the first time about reopening en masse in that way. And I think some decisions that were made around the country about street closures, pseudo-pedestrianisations effectively, were maybe ill-judged, and it reduced accessibility. You're creating a barrier to customers coming into a town, and you're actually saying it's maybe not safe to come in, or what, you're taking away that sense of normality from it. Now, I think if this time around, if we can learn from that, and local authorities can look at pinch points, as the way Duncan described it, and Kirsty talk about keep accessibility up there, because we need accessibility. People need to be able to get to shops. And one of the things that will take a long time to recover, in my view, is people's confidence in public transport. And if you haven't got confidence in public transport, then the car will become the preferred mode of transport in there. And thinking outside of Kingston, not everyone's got the kind of infrastructure that say London and some of the boroughs have. So I'm talking broader here, I suppose, across the UK and Petersfield, which I visited last year. I don't know Petersfield well enough, but I do know that pedestrianisation is often seen as the panacea for a zero carbon solution, as well as creating opportunities for retailers. And I think unless the information, the data, the analysis has been done that shows that removing traffic from that street, removing accessibility is going to benefit the area, then you shouldn't do it. And I think businesses do need real consultation on that as well, because again, I would say last year, because of the nature of what was happening, lots of businesses felt as if they had been left out of the decision-making process and then had to pick up the pieces afterwards when they're trying to recover, when they're trying to make something of their livelihoods. And again, those decisions need real careful thought, in my view. It's not the solution to everything. Pedestrianisation does not mean retail opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Now, just to move us along, I'm going to read out what I think is really a comment from Bob Eden. So he says, I guess this is talking about, the effects and who's, office space or retail space that people require. He says, the answer is different to what your activity is. These are rarely completely independent. So as of now, we are all reassessing why we do what we do, where and for how long. I think that is true. Much of my work is ostensibly independent, but with the filter of human contact, collaboration, and random interactions. Am I heading into the realms of navel gazing? We need a variety of spaces, environments, and working times. More co-use spaces, more flexibility, more flexible management theories. So somebody write that new management theory book, you'll be on to a winner. And I'm going to move on to a question from Matt Walters. Given the potential reduction in demand for commercial workspace, both office and retail, will the council, nodding to you, Duncan, be open to considering repurposing these properties for other uses, such as residential conversions? Maybe existing restrictions on Article 4 areas could be lifted, allowing more flexibility. So will the council or will local authorities be looking at repurposing some of the existing business? Will they help that along? Duncan, any thoughts from you on that?
Yeah, look, this is something we always have to consider, in fact. We receive applications all the time for residential conversions, and it's a very permissive planning system now. So it meant sometimes it's often out of our control to sort of manage that. And absolutely, we know there's a housing crisis in terms of demand, particularly in the affordable housing sector. And we will always encourage, and again, just going back to Kingston Town Centre, more residential, because we believe it could absorb more, and that will serve our residents and our population. But I think we do also have to be cautious as well, because we do need to protect it is a finite resource. Once it's gone, and you basically have to build new again, and that's expensive to do, and that's is something we just have to keep an eye on. There's, London-wide, there's been a huge loss of office and industrial land over the past decade or two, and it's becoming a problem. We don't want our towns to be dormitory towns, and we just have to value commercial space as well. And what is challenging, I suppose, at the moment is we don't want them to play off each other and compete. They should be next to each other, if you like, rather than one taking from the other. So yeah, of course, I think the Article 4 direction often, they are put in because it's a response to that loss of office and commercial space. So it's a very last sort of resort kind of action by the local authority. So everything's always under review, and the local plan will be under review in the coming months. So yeah, not ruled out, but I think we just have to be careful making sort of quite either reactionary or quick decisions on that, because that the planning system there is there also to manage all land uses in that respect. So.
Thank you. Kirsten, you look like you want to
Yeah,
say
I just wonder if I could come in there, just on this point around what space should be in town centres. And absolutely, I think we're all aware, particularly in London, of the significant housing targets that many local authorities are being asked to meet. But when I talk to colleagues across the country, equivalents managing bids in towns and city centres, yes, residential needs to be part of a sustainable town centre mix. But residential also requires other types of use as well: doctors' surgeries, opticians, educational establishments, retail, leisure, hospitality. It's all part of an ecosystem. So I think one of the things that we're really keen to make sure and help contribute to the thinking of in Kingston is let's not overfill the town with residential. As Duncan says, once commercial space is lost, it is lost. But also, how can we be clever about community space and health space and social space to support resi coming into the town centre, which in turn will support our retail, leisure and hospitality businesses as well. Anything we can do to get use in the town centre, I think, is absolutely worth exploring and needs to be built into our plans for town centres and city centres going forward.
Thank you. I'm now going to ask a question from Jill Dewar, who asks, what can we learn from those countries that have moved out of the COVID curve before ourselves in terms of how the workspace has transitioned, perhaps in East Asia? Does anybody know anything about other countries that are ahead of us in terms of coming out the COVID curve and any trends from elsewhere in the world?
So,
yay, Lee, great.
This is a very much a one use case example here. I do have a friend that lives in Hong Kong, and obviously they've had their share of troubles not related to COVID recently, but from a COVID perspective, she is pretty much business as usual now in terms of back to the office. Everyone's okay, they're doing everything that they were doing before. So I don't know specifically with regards to East Asian countries, but I know from her perspective that everything's pretty much exactly the same as it was. I think that whilst, COVID is obviously going to alter some of our businesses and working practices fundamentally, I think it will be one of those things that we may well even regress in the future. People working from home, it's all very well if you have your home office. If you don't, and you've got a 2 up, 2 down, you can't feasibly work from home all the time. So it's all very well, I'm fortunate enough to have one here and I can sit away and hide away from my screaming kids downstairs, but not everyone's got that luxury. So just to blanket it and say that's what we're going to do from now on, I don't think it's entirely viable. And I think that although some office space may be vacated, you're still going to have people that will come and fill it. If we were to move out tomorrow, okay, we take away 40 employees, but there might be a company that has 100 employees that's going to downsize into our unit. So, I think it will set some people on a road where there will be more efficient practices, but ultimately, I think we will be back to normal within a couple of years.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
I was just going to probably add on to that. I totally agree with Lee's view there. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how the situation plays out. I did read an interesting article that suggested that if effectively COVID had come to an end after the first lockdown, then actually the working practices would probably be a lot more desired in terms of a lot more working from home time. But as it is, having stretched out for best part of 12 months now, the view was actually that we may all be a little bit too sick of working from home as much as we perhaps have been. And actually there may be more desire to try and get back to probably what we're describing as normality in a sense, in terms of being in the office more, being with our teams more, etc. So I don't think it's really possible at the moment to really estimate what the response is going to be when restrictions start to lift. So I think guess as much as we might, I think we'll just have to see what happens in reality.
And then these sort of decisions, Colin, are going to be made by, businesses, business leaders, people who own the employers, basically. But I just sort of wonder of the kind of changing behaviours on the part of individuals and businesses, what elements we'd want to keep and what should be encouraged. I just sort of wonder if anyone wants to comment on that.
I think let's deal with the first point there first. I think in terms of decisions being made by the directors of the business, I think yes, that is true to a certain extent. But I think most businesses these days are very good at listening to their staff and understanding how they too want to operate. And I think this has been such a life-changing event for all of us. That actually dialogue in between from business leaders to their teams is possibly the best that it's ever been. I'm sure there are some businesses where that isn't the case, but certainly I think when I'm talking to a lot of the occupiers in our portfolio, engagement with their staff to understand how this is impacting them psychologically, what the pros and cons are of working from home. Even Lee touched on one there of trying to get some peace and quiet when you've got screaming kids around. Very, very difficult to do that in some home environments. So yeah, I think there will be a lot of influence from staff. I think there has to be. So yeah, I think every business will respond slightly differently.
I think kind of like with people now working in their neighbourhoods at home, there may be an opportunity for those areas, say in outer London borough like Kingston, to provide near home working facilities if you do want to get out of the house, but you don't really want to do that long commute anymore. So there is some interesting dynamics happening, and I also was interested, Lee, in what you were saying about technological solutions to all of this, where you're helping companies. I'm not advertising your company, but just in terms of where some of the innovation is to support companies. Perhaps you might want to comment on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, as I say, that communication's been the key, and if your company doesn't communicate, then it will fail somewhere down the road. So that's been the main uptake. We work with, say, manufacturing businesses. Not much has really changed for them. They still need to go to their place of work, do their thing, make their stuff and ship it out. So there's no real change from their point of view. But it is mainly the office-based companies that have really changed. And if I'm honest, I think that a lot of employers are potentially seeing this as a way to cut overheads more than anything else. If we can ditch some office overhead and we can pay everyone a small working from home allowance, then that's that. There are some employers that are better than others that have really done that outreach, surveyed their staff, asked if they're happy, how can we make this work for you? But there are some out there that are just thinking, right, we're going to take the extra cash here at a time when we really need it. So as I say, I think if you're in an expanding company, I think you will end up with more office space than you had a few years down the line, and there will just be a hybrid mix of it. It will work for some, it won't work for others. But like you said, Claudette, a kind of maybe a shared working space like a Regus or something like that, they may become more prevalent. Little, individual pods that you rent for an hour or two for a meeting or a proposal that you've got to get done and you want to get out of the house. That's probably what we're going to see.
Well, I just realised that it's 2 minutes before 2, which basically means that we've come to the end of our session. We have no more audience questions. So I'd just like to thank all of the panel. It's been really fascinating. I've learned a lot. I'm sure the audience has. And thank you indeed. And now I'm going to hand back to Bonnie from White Label to bring us to a formal close. Thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you, Claudette, and thank you very much to our panel for sharing your thoughts and ideas on how the coming months may pan out for British independent businesses. We'll look forward to picking the conversation back up in June and seeing how far we've come and which of your predictions have become a reality. Points for those that have. Looking ahead, audience, we'd be delighted to see you at our last session today, which is actually just about to begin. The details of today's sessions are now on your screen. And as you'll see, our final panel this afternoon, which you can join via the website, we'll be looking at imaginative placemaking with Argent, Westminster Council, We Are Placemaking and Stockton Council. And you might have seen the news about Stockton's plans to demolish half the town centre high street and replace it with a riverside park. So that's set to be an exciting discussion, something a bit different to end a Friday. And thank you for joining us today. Thank you again to Barwell and Aviva, and we'll look forward to seeing you again either later today or when Real Estate Live returns in June. Thank you.